Before we dive into this incredible story, make sure you're part of our journey. Hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and get ready for a story that will leave you thinking. And if you love inspiring tales, a like goes a long way. "Nobody has time for a crying kid," muttered a businessman, stepping around the small figure huddled against the building. 6-year-old Danny wiped his eyes with a sleeve too wet to do any good anymore. The evening crowd surged past, a river of adults with places to be, none of those places involving a lost child with a runny nose and increasing panic. The streetlights had just flickered on, casting harsh shadows across the busy sidewalk. Department store windows glowed with displays Danny couldn't care less about. His mother had been right there just a minute ago. Or was it 10 minutes? Time stretched differently when you're 6 and alone in a crowd of strangers. A police officer stood at the corner, but he was directing traffic, his back to the sidewalk drama. A man in a baseball cap and sunglasses slowed his pace, watching the scene unfold. Others averted their eyes from the crying child, perfecting the urban skill of selective blindness. The man adjusted his cap lower, hesitated, then changed direction, moving deliberately toward the boy. Someone nearby whispered, "Is that?" But the words were swallowed by the city noise. If this moment made you feel something, imagine what's coming next. Hit that like button and stay with us. Subscribe now. Danny's small shoulders shook with each sob, his breath coming in hiccuping gasps that fogged in the cold evening air. The worn blue jacket, a hand-me-down from his cousin, was zipped up to his chin, but it couldn't warm the growing chill of fear in his chest. He'd been holding his mother's hand while she examined a window display, then turned to point something out to her. In that moment of distraction, they'd somehow been separated in the rush of pedestrian traffic. Now he stood paralyzed, knowing he wasn't supposed to move when lost, but feeling increasingly invisible as the minutes ticked by. A woman in a business suit glanced at him, hesitated, then checked her watch and hurried on. A teenage couple walked by, two wrapped up in each other to notice. An elderly man with a cane made eye contact, seemed to consider helping, but then looked away, perhaps deciding it wasn't his problem. The city continued its relentless pace, the indifference of strangers becoming its own kind of cruelty. The man in the baseball cap paused by a newspaper stand, pretending to browse while keeping an eye on the situation. His profile was partially obscured by sunglasses despite the dimming daylight, but there was something familiar about the set of his jaw, the careful way he moved. A young woman walking by did a double-take, tugged her friend's sleeve, and whispered something. Her friend's eyes widened as she looked back at the man, then at the crying child. "Should we call someone?" the friend asked, phone already in hand, but not dialing. "Someone should definitely do something," the other agreed, but neither moved toward Danny. Instead, they lingered, recording the scene with their phones. 2 more pedestrians noticed this and slowed, sensing something noteworthy was happening. The man watched this ripple of attention with a slight frown. The police officer at the corner was now dealing with an irate driver, his back still turned to the growing tableau on the sidewalk. Danny's fear was evolving into a quiet desperation. He'd been told never to go with strangers, but what happened when no stranger would help at all? His mother must be panicking by now. Would she find him? Would anyone help him find her? He clutched the small action figure in his pocket, an Iron Man toy worn smooth by constant handling, a comfort object that now seemed like bitter irony. Heroes didn't exist in real life, just people too busy to care about a lost child. The man in the cap made his decision. He put down the newspaper, removed his sunglasses, and walked directly toward Danny. As he drew closer, the ambient light caught his face more clearly, and the whispers around them intensified. A small crowd was forming, not to help the child, but to watch whatever was about to happen. Phones were raised. Someone said loudly, "That's Robert Downey Jr." The actor ignored the growing attention, his focus entirely on the small, trembling figure against the wall. He knelt down, eye level with the boy, close enough to speak but not so close as to frighten him. "Things are about to take a turn. Don't miss what happens next. Subscribe, like our video, and keep watching." "Hey, buddy," Robert said gently, his voice carrying that familiar timbre that had delivered countless memorable lines, now soft with genuine concern. "Looks like you could use some help. I'm Robert. What's your name?" Danny stared, momentarily forgetting his distress. His hand instinctively tightened around the toy in his pocket. Danny," he managed, voice barely audible above the street noise. "Nice to meet you, Danny. Are you lost?" Robert kept his tone casual, unthreatening. Danny nodded, fresh tears spilling. "I can't find my mom." The crowd around them was growing, the energy shifting from urban indifference to excited recognition. Phones recorded the encounter from every angle. A businessman who had walked past Danny earlier now lingered at the edge of the gathering, his expression a mixture of embarrassment and curiosity. The two young women who had first recognized Robert pushed closer, their earlier hesitation to help the child forgotten in their eagerness to capture the celebrity moment. "We're going to find her," Robert assured Danny, noticing the crowd but focusing solely on the child. "What's your mom's name? What does she look like?" "Her name is Laura," Danny replied, gaining a bit of confidence now that someone was helping. "She has yellow hair and a red coat." Robert nodded, then glanced around at the growing audience, his expression shifting from warmth to something more pointed. "Instead of recording this, could someone help us find Danny's mom? She has blonde hair and is wearing a red coat. Her name is Laura." The crowd shifted uncomfortably. A few people lowered their phones, looking suddenly self-conscious. The businessman who had earlier ignored Danny stepped forward awkwardly. I can help look," he offered, avoiding direct eye contact with Robert. "Thank you," Robert said, his tone making it clear that this was the bare minimum of decent behavior. "Anyone else?" Slowly, others volunteered. The police officer at the corner finally noticed the commotion and began making his way over, radio in hand. Danny pulled the small Iron Man figure from his pocket, turning it nervously in his hands. Robert noticed, a smile flickering across his face. "Hey, is that who I think it is?" he asked, momentarily lightening the mood. Danny nodded, a hint of wonder breaking through his distress. "Iron Man. He's my favorite." "Mine too," Robert winked, earning the first small smile from the boy. The irony wasn't lost on the onlookers. Tony Stark, the character known for his initial self-absorption who becomes a true hero, now embodied in real life as Robert gently guided Danny to a nearby bench where they could sit while others searched. The police officer arrived, taking in the situation with professional efficiency despite his obvious recognition of the celebrity present. He immediately radioed in the details about Danny's mother. The crowd, now feeling the implicit judgment of both the officer and the famous actor, began to disperse, some to genuinely help search, others to avoid the uncomfortable mirror being held up to their previous inaction. Sometimes the real heroes are the ones who simply stop to help, Robert said quietly to Danny, but his words carried to those still nearby. The businessman who had volunteered to help overheard and flushed with shame, remembering how he'd stepped around the crying child earlier. He removed his expensive coat and draped it around Danny's shoulders, a small gesture of atonement. This story is only getting deeper. What would you do in this situation? Comment below, and let's talk. Danny! A frantic voice cut through the evening noise. A blonde woman in a red coat pushed through the scattered crowd, her face tear-streaked and desperate. Danny! Danny's head snapped up, his small body electrified with recognition. Mom! Robert helped him down from the bench as Danny bolted toward his mother. They collided in a fierce embrace, Laura dropping to her knees on the cold concrete, clutching her son as if he might disappear again. She was sobbing, checking him over for injuries, kissing his face, all while murmuring, "I'm sorry, I'm so sorry," over and over. The scene was raw, primal, a mother's fear and relief laid bare on a public street. Even the most jaded onlookers felt a tightening in their throats. The businessman who had given Danny his coat stepped back, unnoticed. The two young women who had first recognized Robert lowered their phones, the intimacy of the moment finally outweighing their desire for social media content. The police officer discreetly canceled the alert he'd just issued, watching with professional satisfaction. Laura finally looked up from Danny, her eyes registering the man standing nearby, the scattered crowd, the overall scene. Her gaze fixed on Robert, recognition dawning slowly through her emotional haze. "You," she began, her voice breaking. "You helped my son." Robert shrugged slightly, uncomfortable with the gratitude. "Anyone would have." "But they didn't," she said, her voice gaining strength. "They didn't. You did." The simple truth hung in the air. The businessman shifted his weight, staring at his expensive shoes. Others in the lingering crowd looked away, the unspoken indictment impossible to ignore. For a brief moment, the usual urban shields were down. The practiced indifference, the careful avoidance of others' crises, the collective agreement to mind one's own business, all exposed as the thin social constructs they were. "Ma'am," the police officer interjected gently, "would you like to file a report?" Laura shook her head, still holding Danny close. "No, we're fine now. We just got separated in the crowd." She looked back at Robert. "I don't know how to thank you." Robert knelt down to Danny's level again. "Hey, Danny. Looks like mission accomplished." Danny nodded, still clutching his mother's hand, but more composed now. He pulled out his Iron Man figure, studying it, and then looking at Robert with the unfiltered directness only children possess. "You're not really Iron Man," he said matter-of-factly, "but you helped me just like he would." A surprisingly tender smile crossed Robert's face. "Sometimes real heroes don't wear suits of armor, bud. Sometimes they're just regular people who stop when someone needs help." He looked up, his gaze sweeping across the remaining onlookers. Sometimes heroes are mothers who never stop looking for their kids, or strangers who take a moment to care about someone else's problem. The businessman stepped forward, returning to the present moment. "Your coat," he said, gesturing to Danny. "Keep it," the man replied. "It's cold tonight." Then to Laura, "I'm sorry I didn't stop earlier when I saw your son. I was in a hurry, but that's no excuse." Laura's expression softened. "You're helping now," she said simply. "Thank you." The simple exchange sent ripples through the small gathering. Something was shifting. Not just a lost child found, but something in the collective conscience of these random urbanites. It's not over yet. The best part is coming. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss it. As Laura and Danny prepared to leave, something remarkable happened. The small crowd that had gathered not to help but to witness a celebrity sighting began to disperse differently than they had formed. People were making eye contact with each other, small nods of acknowledgement passing between strangers. The shared experience creating a momentary community where none had existed before. The two young women who had first recognized Robert approached hesitantly. "We're really sorry," one said, her eyes downcast. "We should have helped right away instead of just taking pictures." Robert regarded them not unkindly. "What matters is what we learn, right? Next time you see someone who needs help, especially a kid, maybe that can be your first instinct." They nodded earnestly, then to everyone's surprise, deleted the videos they'd taken. It was a small gesture but symbolically powerful. The businessman checked his watch and realized he was now very late for his meeting, but the urgency had somehow dissipated. The police officer finished his notes, tipping his hat to Robert with professional respect. Laura adjusted Danny's jacket, still visibly shaken but composed now. "We should get home," she said, then turned to Robert. "I know you probably hear this all the time, but your movies mean a lot to Danny. He watches them whenever he's scared or sad." Her voice softened. "I never imagined you'd be the one to help him when he really needed it." "Just a guy in the right place at the right time," Robert replied. But there was a weight to his words, an acknowledgement of the platform he had and the influence it carried. He gave Danny a fist bump. "Take care of that action figure, okay? And remember what I said about heroes." A taxi pulled up, perhaps called by the officer. Robert helped Laura and Danny into it, shielding them from the few remaining onlookers. As the taxi pulled away, Danny waved through the back window, the small Iron Man figure clutched in his other hand. Robert waved back, then pulled his cap lower and prepared to continue his interrupted evening. But something had changed on that street corner. The businessman was on his phone, not making business calls but checking on his own son. The two young women were deep in conversation, gesturing animatedly about something that seemed important. Even the police officer stood differently, more attentive to the pedestrians passing by. The next morning, a single video appeared online. Unlike the typical celebrity sightings that flood social media, this one was different. Filmed from a distance, respectful, capturing not just the moment when Robert Downey Jr. helped a lost child, but the transformation of an entire street corner of strangers. It showed the businessman giving his coat, the young women deleting their videos, the officer's quiet efficiency. It captured Robert's words about heroes being regular people who simply stopped to help. The video went viral not because a famous actor was in it, but because it showed a moment of genuine human connection in a world increasingly devoid of it. Comments flooded in from people sharing their own stories of being helped by strangers or, more poignantly, times they had walked past someone in need and now regretted it. In a city where thousands of people pass each other daily without a glance, something small but significant had shifted. On that same street corner a week later, an elderly man dropped his groceries and was immediately surrounded by helping hands. Across town, a lost tourist received directions from 3 different passers-by. A woman crying on a park bench found a stranger offering a tissue and a listening ear. No one would ever know how many ripples spread from that one moment when a man, famous or not, simply stopped to help a crying child. But Danny knew. Every night when he clutched his Iron Man figure, he remembered what real heroes do. Wow, what a story! If this moved you, imagine what else we have for you. Hit that like button, drop a comment, and let us know what you think.